For years, Ellen DeGeneres was untouchable. She was America's sweetheart, the woman who danced her way into living rooms every single afternoon, the host who told everyone to be kind, while her studio audience cheered and celebrities lined up to sit on her couch. She built one of the most successful daytime talk show empires in television history, and for a long time, nobody dared question what was happening behind the curtain. But that curtain has now been fully pulled back. And what people found behind it wasn't kindness. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't the woman America thought it knew. What people found was something that those inside Hollywood had apparently known about for years. And now, with Ellen's show gone, her reputation in ruins, and multiple people finally speaking their truth, one question keeps coming up. How did this go on for so long? Let's go back to where the cracks first became visible to the public. Brad Garrett is not someone who speaks carelessly. He's a seasoned comedian and actor who spent years around the entertainment industry, including time connected to the Ellen DeGeneres show. So when he stepped forward and made his feelings publicly known, people paid attention. Garrett made it clear that the toxic environment surrounding Ellen's show was not some hidden secret buried deep inside the production. According to him, the way people were treated behind the scenes was something the industry was already well aware of. It wasn't whispered about in corners, it was known. The people who worked in Hollywood, who moved through those circles, who understood how that world operated, already had a sense of what Ellen's set was really like. That is perhaps the most damning part of his comments. Not just that it happened, but that it was common knowledge and nothing was done about it for years. The smile, the dance, the be kind slogan. All of it continued while those on the inside apparently looked the other way. Garrett also shed light on the structure that allowed Ellen to maintain her public image, while the behind-the-scenes reality was something entirely different. He described a dynamic where a producer named Ed Glavin functioned essentially as an enforcer. Ellen would observe difficult moments, even laugh at them, and lean on others to do the difficult, ugly work that she didn't want her name attached to. One account described her watching Glavin yell at crew members and responding not with correction, but with amusement, reportedly calling him her dog, her attack dog, the person who did what she didn't want to be seen doing herself. So when Ellen later claimed she wasn't aware of the environment on her own show, Garrett's response was simple and direct. It was a lie. In 2020, BuzzFeed News published a report that changed everything. Journalist Kristen Yandeli spoke with dozens of former employees of the Ellen DeGeneres show. What they described was not an isolated incident or a single bad day. It was a pattern, culture, a way of operating that had been baked into the show for years. Former staff members described a workplace defined by fear, racial insensitivity, and a management style that left people feeling humiliated and disposable. One former employee recounted a head writer approaching her at a party and admitting he only knew the names of the white people who worked there. Others described being fired or punished after taking medical leave. People who attended funerals for family members reportedly faced consequences for doing so. Then came a second BuzzFeed report, dropping just 2 weeks after the first. This one went even further. Former employees described sexual harassment and inappropriate behavior from senior producers. Names like Kevin Lehman and Ed Glavin were specifically mentioned in connection with these allegations. The show that built its entire brand on being a feel-good, inclusive, kind space had reportedly been run in a way that was the direct opposite of everything it claimed to stand for. Warner Brothers, the studio behind the show, launched an internal investigation. They interviewed dozens of current and former employees. Their conclusion acknowledged that there were deficiencies in the show's day-to-day management. Several producers were eventually let go. Ellen herself responded with a letter to her staff. She said she was disappointed. She said she hoped the show had been a place where everyone was treated with respect. She acknowledged that clearly for some people it had not been. She promised things would change. But for many of the people who had already lived through that environment, the letter wasn't enough. And for the broader public, the damage was done. The image had cracked, and once that happens, it is nearly impossible to rebuild. Katt Williams had been saying for years that Hollywood is not what it appears to be. That behind the glamour and the awards and the carefully crafted public images, there are power structures that protect certain people while destroying others. He argued repeatedly that when artists suffer professionally, it is rarely accidental. His words took on new weight as the Ellen story unfolded. His core argument that in the entertainment industry, someone is always making money when artists are losing, and that none of it is coincidental, resonated with people who had been watching Ellen's story develop. The idea that an environment like the one described on Ellen's set could persist for nearly 2 decades without consequences raises real questions about who knew, who benefited, and who was protected. When voices like Katt Williams and Brad Garrett, people with real experience inside the industry, begin pointing in the same direction, it becomes harder to dismiss. These are not outsiders speculating. These are people who understand how the machine works. And they were both, in their own ways, saying the same thing, that the Ellen DeGeneres that America was sold was a performance, and the people closest to the production knew it. To understand the full picture of who Ellen DeGeneres was during her rise to power, it helps to look at her relationship with actress Anne Heche, which ran from approximately 1997 to 2000. That relationship was groundbreaking for its time. Ellen had publicly come out in 1997, both personally and through her television character, and the backlash was severe. And Heche stood beside her through that period, and both women paid a professional price. And later revealed that attending a film premiere with Ellen led directly to her being fired from a studio project and effectively blacklisted from major studio films for roughly a decade. She described being escorted out of the premiere, told the studio would not accept photographs of her and Ellen together, and then losing her job. She said she was warned beforehand that this would happen and went anyway. That decision cost her years of career momentum. But what emerged in later interviews was something even more revealing about the private dynamic between the two women, and described a relationship in which she increasingly erased parts of herself to accommodate Ellen. She stepped back from acting. She pulled away from friendships. She tried to build a life that would make Ellen feel secure and loved. And over time, she felt shut off from the world around her. The breaking point, by Anne's own account, came when she told Ellen she needed friends. Real human connection outside of their relationship. Ellen's reported response was that she did not want a girlfriend who needed that, and said that was the day she left. That single moment speaks volumes. The same controlling dynamic that former employees would later describe experiencing at the show. A leader who demanded total loyalty, who used others to enforce her will, who punished those who didn't fall in line, appears to have existed in her personal relationships as well. And also later spoke about how even years after the relationship ended, she felt the weight of Ellen's presence. When Ellen's show was canceled and Ellen moved abroad, and reportedly described it as being able to breathe again, she said it felt like fresh air, like something had finally lifted. The numbers tell their own story. After the workplace allegations became public in 2020, the Ellen DeGeneres show began a steady decline in ratings. Viewers who had tuned in for years began to tune out. Sponsors grew cautious. The industry that had protected and elevated Ellen for so long began to quietly create distance. In 2022, after 19 seasons, the Ellen DeGeneres show came to an end. Ellen framed it as a natural conclusion, a decision she had made on her own terms. But the context surrounding that decision made it hard to read it that way. The show hadn't just lost ratings, it had lost the public's trust. And in television, that is everything. What happened to Ellen DeGeneres is a case study in the gap between public image and private reality. She built an empire on a message of kindness, and that message was her greatest strength and ultimately her most exposed vulnerability. When the people who had worked for her and lived alongside her began to describe something entirely different, the contrast was too great to ignore. Brad Garrett was right. Katt Williams was right. The employees who spoke to BuzzFeed News were right. And Heche, in the painful and personal details she shared before her tragic death in 2022, was right. The machine kept running for 19 years. But machines eventually break down. And when this one did, the people who had been saying something was wrong all along were finally heard. Ellen DeGeneres is not in prison. She has not been charged with a crime. But her reputation, her show, and her standing in the industry she once dominated are gone. And for the dozens of employees who described their experiences, and for Anne Heche who carried the weight of that relationship long after it ended, that public reckoning may be the closest thing to accountability that anyone will get. The smile was real. The dance was real. But so was everything happening behind the cameras. And now the whole world knows it.